Hello there, Ramblers, and welcome back to another gripping instalment of Rees Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming, and technology. Hope you're doing well out there. And indeed, another sunny weekend here in the UK. We do have Storm Dave, which is apparently going to be landing over the weekend up in the north in Scotland. I'm not sure if that's somehow related to our good friend Dave Velociraptor from This Week in Retro. Perhaps so. Perhaps Storm Dave is another nickname of his that I wasn't familiar with. But anyway, as you can probably tell, I'm a little bit tired today, a little bit subdued, and I'm also frantically packing for my holiday next week. I'm going skiing, very kind of late season skiing in France, which should be nice. That does mean that there won't be an episode of Rees Rambles next week, of course, because I won't be around to record it. And I guess that means that we should also get this week's show on the road. And I just wanted to start off with a rather amusing little piece of news that has been doing the rounds just before we jump into our main stories for this week. And this is to do with this Artemis NASA mission, which has, of course, launched towards the moon this week. Very successful launch, which is great to see. I think they've been in orbit for a bit, just doing some checks and stuff, and it's all been given the go-ahead, and it all looks like it's on track to be successful, which is fantastic. First time humans have visited the moon in a very long time. Did I read 50-plus years somewhere? Of course, they won't be actually landing on the moon. They will be flying around the other side of the moon, the dark side of the moon. But it is actually the furthest that humans have ever been from Earth. So I think that is quite an important milestone, despite all the people saying, oh, well, why don't they land on the moon? But one step at a time. But they have run into somewhat of an IT issue, somewhat of a technical problem. And this did make me chuckle this week. So, this is the clip of their communications, which has been doing the rounds on social media. Let's just give this a little listen.
We suspect the issue with your PCD may be Optimus software. We were able to connect to PCD1 on, we can see it on the network. So with your Go, we can remote in and take a look directly.
Yeah, go for it. And then I also see that I have two Microsoft Outlooks, and neither one of those are working. If you want to remote in and check Optimus on those two Outlooks, that would be awesome.
All right, we will join in on your PCD, and we'll let you know when we're done.
That's right. 2 copies of Microsoft Outlook running, and apparently neither of them actually work. And if that doesn't sum up modern-day Microsoft for you, I don't know what does. Anyway, let's get on with the rest of the stories for this week. And of course, if you are listening from outer space, best of luck to you. But first up, of course, a very quick message from our sponsor, PCBWay.com. Now, you're probably familiar with PCBWay thanks to their 11-plus years of experience in the PCB fabrication business, in which time they have built up quite the reputation for very fast turnaround, affordable pricing, and excellent quality control. But they have also recently started offering some other additional services, stuff including 3D printing, CNC machining, injection molding, and sheet metal fabrication. So, they really are a one-stop shop for all of your fabrication projects. So if you have a requirement for any of those particular services for your next project, please do check out the link down in the description to PCBWay.com. And once more, a big thank you to PCBWay for all of your support for the channel, for my main channel, and also for the wider maker community at large. So I thought just for a moment we would stick with the topic of space, and indeed specifically the moon, because there has also been some other retro computing and space/moon related goings on this week, I guess. And I wanted to start off by taking a look at the Apollo Guidance Computer article here on Wikipedia, because it's quite an interesting machine, isn't it? All the way back in 1966, it used hand-woven magnetic core memory and indeed core rope memory for its ROM, for its hard-coded program memory. It had a 2.048 megahertz CPU, apparently. But as far as comparing it to kind of much newer, more kind of modern computers is concerned, is there any kind of direct comparison? I don't know. Of course, it was a very kind of unique architecture designed for that specific set of missions, the Apollo missions to the moon, of course, but a very interesting bit of hardware, one that has been covered in great detail in the past, and I actually thought this article was very interesting. Not that I sat here and read the whole thing, of course. I've got a ramble to record, but the reason I was interested in this specifically is because something that a YouTuber has been up to this week. And this is a story over on tomshardware.com, one of my favourite websites, by Joey Morales. That's not a name that I've seen come up before. It's usually Mark Tyson, isn't it? But let's give this one a chance, because it is a very interesting story and very well written, I will say. So, enthusiast lands on the moon using hardware from the 1980s. ZX Spectrum home computer with 3.5 megahertz CPU and 48K of memory power Kerbal space flight. So what has happened here is that this YouTuber, Scott Manley, has hooked his 48K ZX Spectrum up to his computer and basically used it as the guidance computer for a moon mission in Kerbal Space Program. If you remember that space simulation game from a few years ago. I actually played it quite a lot. I think it was still in beta or in like early access or something when I was playing it, and then I kind of fell out of the habit and never really got back into it. But I do have some friends who are into it in a very big way, and it is a great game. Probably best that I do avoid it, to be honest, because I will get sucked in. But anyway, back to the story. This hardware is nothing compared to what billions of people have in their pockets today, but it's still enough to get on the moon, at least virtually. Mere weeks after successfully using a ZX Spectrum to fly a simulated spacecraft, space enthusiast and YouTuber Scott Manley has successfully landed on the moon using the home computer from the 1980s. Of course, Manley didn't have an actual lunar lander with him, so he used the 2015 spaceflight simulator Kerbal Space Program, using a ZX Spectrum to control the spacecraft. For those unfamiliar with the Spectrum, it's a home computer built by UK company Sinclair Research, released in 1982. Wow, was Kerbal Space Program really 2015? That's 11 years ago. My goodness, how time flies. Anyway, this 8-bit device had a Z80 CPU that ran at 3.5 megahertz with either 16, 48 or 128K of memory. It ran on Sinclair Basic operating system and was known for introducing kids to gaming and programming in the 80s because of its relatively low price. This might seem sorely underpowered compared to today's computers, with Manley saying that some phone chargers are much more powerful than this device. However, we must note that the ZX Spectrum launched 13 years after Apollo 11 actually landed on the moon. The Apollo guidance computer, which was in charge of the spacecraft's guidance, navigation and control, was far less powerful with its 2.048 MHz processor, 15-bit word length and 1-bit parity, capable of storing 2048 words. And that was indeed, I think, directly copied and pasted from that Wikipedia article. Only to be fair, I'd also do the same, so I'm not going to judge you for that. Anyway, programmers had to be extra creative when writing code, ensuring they used as little data as possible to achieve what they wanted. Although the ZX Spectrum had so much more memory than the original AGC, that is still a challenge that Manley had to go through, programming the virtual PC with the variables it needed to operate the virtual spacecraft and computing the attitude and acceleration required to maneuver and land on the moon. Of course, the challenge does not end there, as he also needed to virtually connect the ZX Spectrum to the simulator. Since the device is so old, it does not have any modern I/O ports like USB. Thankfully, Sinclair Research also produced Interface One, the proprietary storage system for the ZX Spectrum, which included an RS-232 serial port, allowing the ZX Spectrum to talk to a Windows PC. But because Kerbal Space Program does not support serial input, he had to install the Kerbal RPC mod, which lets users control the ship remotely using Python or whatever language you like. And then it just goes on to basically give a step-by-step of what actually happens in the video. So basically, he's written this program on the ZX Spectrum, sends out serial commands over the RS-232 port, which is then interpreted by this plugin for Kerbal Space Program and actually directly controls the spaceship. Now, of course, being a YouTuber and being a YouTube video, you can actually go and watch this for yourself. You don't need to read about it or listen to me reading an article that someone else has written about it. The video is here over on Scott Manley's YouTube channel, 14 minutes and 50 seconds long. And I am going to make this one of my videos of the week this week as well. So it will be linked down in the description, and we'll talk a bit more about it later on in this ramble. And of course, this is, as mentioned, a follow-up to a previous video that he did where he actually flew to the moon using the same setup, but didn't actually land on the moon in that one. So yeah, I think if NASA is looking to land on the moon in the near future, the next logical step after its Artemis mission, which is just launched to fly around the moon, perhaps they could consult with Scott directly and he could help them out and maybe, I guess the ZX Spectrum is probably a bit more reliable than the computers that they're using at the moment, as we just heard in the opening to this ramble. Although thankfully, those problematic Windows PCs with their multiple copies of Outlook aren't actually doing the guidance for this mission. They're just there for communications purposes, thankfully. So there we go. That is Scott Manley, the YouTuber. Can my first computer control a spaceship? And indeed, it turns out that he can, and successfully land it on the moon using a 48K ZX Spectrum. Very, very good stuff. I like that a lot. One topic which keeps coming up again and again here on Rees Rambles, and with very good reason, because I think it's very important, is, of course, game preservation, something I talk about pretty much every single week, whether that be in the form of enjoying the original games on their original media, on original hardware, discs or cartridges or whatever, or perhaps one of these mini consoles or software emulation, something like Mister or something like that, or of course also ports, either to modern systems or to systems for which these games were never intended to be released back in the day. I love it all. I think it's great. And of course, the history of gaming is very important to our cultural history as well. So it's always good to see lots of different ways to experience it and to preserve it for future generations to study and also to enjoy, because ultimately these games were meant to be played. Now, on that subject, one thing that I have been talking about quite a lot recently is decompilation, particularly on the Nintendo console, so the N64 specifically. People taking stuff like Mario 64 and getting the final finished executable files, and basically you can run a process on those files which turns them back into the original source code, or at least something approximating the original source code, which will compile into the same end result. Trying not to overcomplicate this too much, but that means that we can take that source code and we can modify it. And one of the modifications that we can make, of course, is to adapt that to run on a different system entirely. And that's what's happened with stuff like Mario 64, Mario Kart, and a few other N64 games that I have talked about in recent weeks. Another one was last week I talked about a port of Animal Crossing from the GameCube to the PC, and how that was quite controversial because the author had been using one of these AI tools to assist with the coding process, and there had been quite a bit of backlash against that project as a result of that. So, quite a lot to unpick here. But if you are looking to enjoy some of these decompilation and recompilation projects yourself, it has been a bit of a minefield, I guess, in the past. I don't know if minefield is the right word to use, but of course we are dealing with Nintendo here, and they are famously quite litigious when it comes to their old games, which they are still selling on their modern day consoles, such as the Switch. And so you've had to track down the original ROMs yourself. Of course, they have to be the right version. You have to check checksums and stuff to make sure that they are indeed, uncorrupted, unmodified in their own right. Then you have to run a script which basically decompiles that on your own machine and then recompiles it. And it's all right. It's not overly complicated, but there are steps and things to have to go through to actually just check out these games. However, that is no longer the case thanks to a new tool, which is being reported over here on SteamDeckHQ.com. And indeed, this is aimed specifically at Steam Deck users. So, the story here: it is easier than ever to find all native PC ports of retro games thanks to N64 Recomp Launcher by Noah Kopetsky. And indeed, this is N64 Recomp Launcher, so it is specifically designed to launch all of these recompiled N64 games. So, Noah writes, recently I've been covering a lot of recompilations of retro games. You and me both. These games, which are usually Nintendo 64 titles, have been fully decompiled, which gives us a chance to recompile them into native PC ports. I just said that, Noah. The benefit of this over emulation is significant. We have higher frame rate support, better resolution support, mod support, and a wealth of other enhancements. However, there are so many that are released and it can be hard to keep track of them. I didn't even know that Gomon 64 had a PC port. No, I didn't know that either, Noah. Thankfully, there is a great tool we can use to not only keep track of the projects, but also download and set them up easily. There's a bit of a piracy disclaimer here, which we'll just skip over. The N64 Recomp Launcher is the saving grace I was looking for. Developed by Sir Diablo and posted on GitHub, this launcher allows us to nicely see and download the recompilations that have been released. As the name suggests, the bulk of these are Nintendo 64 games, which are displayed very nicely in the UI. However, it actually has support for other recompilations, including the recently covered Animal Crossing GameCube Recomp, and even Dragon Ball, let's go with Dragon Ball Z on this one. No, it's not very British of me, but Dragon Ball Z Budokai recomp of the Xbox 360 game. Also, wasn't aware that that existed, so it's great that they're all in one place, isn't it? So, yeah, it's extremely easy to use on the Steam Deck. You just have to install the Linux x64 version from GitHub, move all the downloaded files into a folder on our desktop, and then add the executable to Steam. After that, you should be able to access it in Steam game mode and use the gamepad support. You'll have to supply your own legally dumped copies of each game, and you have to make sure to always select the Linux x64 version of each recompilation when you download it. There are some that don't have Linux support yet, like the Animal Crossing reconciliation. Recompilation. You throw me there, Noah. Steam Deck HQ needs a proofreader, evidently. Anyway, so in cases like that, you'll have to manually... I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm certainly not. So in cases like that, you'll have to manually go to the installed files and add them to Steam directly. Anyway, the point here is that there is this launcher, and you still have to find the original ROM files for it and make sure you drop them in the correct place. Of course, copyright is still a concern, as is piracy and stuff. Very wise of them, as Nintendo are involved with this. They've got Duke Nukem 0 Hour on there as well. I remember that. Was that on the N64? That was that weird kind of side-scrolling like platform Duke Nukem game, wasn't it? I was going to say 2D, but it wasn't. I think it was actually 3D. Another one that I wasn't aware that there was a recompilation of, so that's quite cool. Yes, this is going to be a lot of fun to check out. So, this is designed for the Steam Deck, but of course it will run on other systems as well. Integrates with Steam, also includes gamepad support as well. It goes on to say here that it doesn't work particularly smoothly in game mode using the gamepad. You are better off kind of launching it as a desktop application with the emulated kind of mouse mode and stuff. But hey, it's early days yet, and at least collecting all of these things together in one place and giving us a nice convenient launcher is certainly a step up from having to discover these things independently and go digging around at GitHub repos and stuff. So I'm all for it. Anything that makes enjoying these ports and things easier is definitely up my street. Got Banjo 64 on there as well. Banjo Kazooie, Nuts and Bolts, all sorts of stuff. Wonderful. Bomberman 64, Dr. Mario 64. See, I didn't even know that half of these existed, and I've just learnt all of these from looking at a screenshot. So, very, very good stuff. Of course, that will be linked down below if you're interested in checking that out on your Steam Deck or indeed on your other equivalent Linux desktop Windows gaming device. Wonderful stuff. Noah Kopetsky, thank you ever so much for letting us know about that. And I'm probably going to check that out. May even use it in a video at some point. So, another story with a bit of a Nintendo connection next, but certainly not a Nintendo-specific story. No, this is all about DLSS 5, which I'm sure you've seen pop up all over your social media feeds over the past couple of weeks. This is this new NVIDIA upscaling technology where basically you can take your older games and your graphics card will add AI-powered upscaling to it, which people have compared to something called a Yassify filter. Apparently it's a social media thing that can make you look like heavily made up and all of that stuff. I don't know. Apparently it's a thing that all the kids are playing with just lately. Get off my lawn. But anyway, you will have no doubt seen the videos of this and also the mockery of this. Stuff like scenes from certain games where the characters look completely different in different cutscenes because, of course, this AI upscaling thing has no consistency to it whatsoever, adding all sorts of fine details and things that the original developers never intended and making characters look absolutely nothing like they're supposed to look. And yet, the industry is forging ahead with this, and I know that there are people out there who are big fans of this and think it's a good thing. And of course, you can also turn it off if you don't want to use it. So I can't complain about it too much. I don't really play modern AAA games anyway. I just think it's a very interesting development. As someone who was around from the very early days, from the early 90s, and kind of grew up with 3D accelerators and stuff, adding stuff. I mean, obviously, we've had like frame generation and upscaling and stuff for quite a while anyway. But adding stuff that the original developers never intended and can't predict or control, and deviating from their original vision and their original art style and stuff is quite a big step, I think, for the games industry. Anyway, I came across this rather interesting story this week about V-Rally 3 on the Game Boy Advance, and it's all tied in. Though essentially what the author has done here is kind of tied it in to DLSS 5, and it's a bit of a comparison. It's a bit of a tenuous link, but I quite like it, actually. I think it's actually quite a good bit of journalism, quite an interesting article. about people, and this is a team of 2 people back in the 90s. Putting in a huge amount of work to try to squeeze every last drop of power and performance out of this console and to get it to render true 3D graphics, and how that kind of compares to this, modern day approach. That's the gist of it anyway. So, if we click play on the video at the top here, there is a little bit of an intro here. I think we can see, there we go, we can see what the DLSS 5 stuff does. And then we've got this guy here, Jim Trinker. I assume he works for IGN. He looks like, the lead singer of Bowling for Soup. Do you remember them? Jared, I think his name is. A vid, of course. Anyway, there is a video here. It is a 10-minute and 15-second long video, but there's also an article attached to this that you can read at your leisure if you like. And it is a rather interesting story about the development of V-Rally 3 on the Game Boy Advance. And I will also point out, and I will link this down below as well, that if you're interested in the Game Boy Advance's 3D rendering capabilities, and it was absolutely not designed as a 3D console at all, the true 3D games on that console are quite few and far between, and the lengths that the developers had to go to kind of push it to do stuff that it was never designed to do are very impressive. I actually made a video about this called "Were There Any Good FPS Games on the Game Boy Advance?" And I know I've given this one a bit of a shout out in the past. Let's start with Dark Arena. There we go. So it's my own video, which ended up being about half an hour long. This was a real labour of love that I did over the Christmas period a couple of years ago, and captured all the footage myself and did all the research and stuff. It's a really quite comprehensive video, if I do say so myself. So if you want to see what some kind of true 3D rendered games on the Game Boy Advance actually looked like, I think it's quite a good starting point, if I do say so myself, although it does focus specifically on first-person shooters. And this article that we're talking about now is about a racing game. But anyway, that's by the by. Just a bit of a plug, a bit of a shameless shout-out to my own channel. So getting back to this article by Jim Trinker, the classic Nintendo handheld turned 25 this week amidst an ongoing bust-up about the very future of graphics tech. An anniversary that reminds us how hollow the pursuit of ever-increasing graphical fidelity is when all the post-processed path tracing in the world can't make the driving in Cyberpunk 2077 feel as good as V-Rally 3 on the Game Boy Advance. That's what we like to hear. I don't think I've ever played V-Rally 3, actually. I think I played the original on the Dreamcast, and was V-Rally 2 on the Dreamcast as well. May have played that. Seem to remember they were very, very good rallying games. But anyway, back to the article. Look at it. Squeezing every bit of horsepower out of the GBA's dinky 16 MHz processor, a system explicitly designed to run sprite-based 2D games, V-Rally 3 represents an incredible feat of software engineering. A fully 3D racer conjured from textured polygons, clever art direction, and 3 entire volts of copper-topped power. This was damn close to PS1 quality gaming you could enjoy on a bus, at a time when the PS1 was still very much a going concern, making the GBA a very early taste of what would be possible decades later, where any lingering distinction between a handheld game and a home console or PC game has been utterly obliterated. That's a very good point. I like that. Well done. Well done, Jim. Sure, harsh compromises have to be made, for example, to get The Witcher 3 running on the original Switch, which makes it objectively the worst possible version of that game, but plenty of you loved it all the same, and it sold gangbusters. For many of us, having the game running on affordable hardware that you can take to the dunny is more valuable than how sharp it looks, which rather suggests that anyone willing to sacrifice the concept of art direction on the twin GPU'd altar of slightly wonky photorealism probably isn't that in touch with the average game enjoyer. Typical game enjoyer. So anyway, it is quite a wordy article, as you can see. But yeah, it's... I found it... I thought it was quite amusing, quite tongue-in-cheek and stuff. And of course, if you're wondering what's going on with all of this DLSS 5 upscaling technology and what everyone's talking about that, it's a good introduction to that and how that works. Evidently, as you can see, Jim is not a fan of that technology. But he is a huge fan of, the plight of... developers back in the day trying to push these old handhelds and things to their limits, and the way that he interweaves the two stories and bounces them off each other, I thought was quite good. Of course, I'm not going to steal their traffic by sitting here and reading the entire article to you, and also that probably wouldn't be very interesting for you anyway, but that will be linked down below. And yeah, it's just a reminder, I think, as well, of one of my favourite consoles, the Game Boy Advance, and what it was truly capable of in the right hands, even though it was absolutely not designed to run some of this stuff. But yeah, it talks about the developers behind it, their V3D custom game engine that they developed, and essentially how they built a whole career around these 3D engines for the Game Boy Advance. And it does go on to mention stuff like Doom and Duke Nukem 3D, which were ported to the system. So do give that a read. Very interesting article for your long bank holiday weekend. And yeah, a bit of Game Boy Advance love as well, despite it being somewhat tainted with this regretful modern technology. And once more, in the world of regrettable AI-related news, which sadly seems to be something that I am reporting on more and more just lately, of course, we need to talk about hardware prices. Of course, the increase in RAM prices, hard drive prices, specifically to do with these AI companies buying them up for their data centers. Although there has been a bit of good news, I think, in the past week to do with OpenAI, the people that make ChatGPT, and how they'd basically pre-ordered over half of the world's RAM supply for this year or something, and it turns out that they've actually cancelled that order because they've seen such a big downturn in users and things, people leaving for Claude and all this other stuff that I won't go into because it's not retro related specifically, but there is something that does affect us, I think, in the retro and vintage world, and in the the kind of hobbyist electronics world as well. And that is the Raspberry Pi. Now, of course, it has been absolutely huge, and deservedly so. I think it was, a very important platform when it first launched, and there are so many projects out there built around the work of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Stuff like the Pico IDE, which, of course, I covered, which uses the Pico, and Pico Gus and Pico Mem, all of those wonderful retro computing projects. But this is about a new model that has been launched by the Raspberry Pi Foundation in response to these rising RAM prices. Now, I actually saw this pop up on my feeds on April Fool's Day, on the 1st of April, and I thought it was an April Fool's joke, but no, they've actually gone out of their way to say that no, it is not. It is something that is joining the model lineup, and it is a ever so slightly cut down Raspberry Pi to try to keep prices in check. Although, looking at some of these prices, I think they very much failed on that front, although perhaps not entirely their fault. Perhaps, some of it is to do with outside forces. Anyway, without further ado, a new 3GB Raspberry Pi 4 for $83.75, and more memory-driven price increases. This is a story here from Eben Upton himself, of course, the founder of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, Mr. Pi himself. Not to be confused with Mr. Pi, which is a different product. Anyway, as many of you are aware, the price of memory continues to rise, with a 7-fold increase over the last year in the price of LPDDR4 DRAM. My goodness, a 7-fold increase used on the Raspberry Pi 4 and 5. Providing low-cost general-purpose computing remains a non-negotiable priority for us at Raspberry Pi, so while we can't avoid passing on a portion of these increased costs, we're also doing engineering work to expand the range of memory density options available to our customers. We want to make sure you don't pay for more memory than you need. Today we are implementing further price increases across parts of our product range, and are also introducing a new 3GB Raspberry Pi 4. Priced at $83.75. Notwithstanding today's date, our new computer is as real as the rest of our products, and you can order it now from Raspberry Pi approved resellers around the world. And there is a table here talking about some of these price increases, and these are in dollars, of course. I say, of course, obviously Raspberry Pi is a British institution, but of course I can't escape the fact that the US dollar is kind of the universally accepted global currency, and I will talk about some pound sterling prices in a second, but let's just go over this table. So the Pi 4 and 5 4GB is increasing by $25, the 4 and 5 8GB is increasing by $50, the Raspberry Pi 16GB is increasing in price by $100, and there's more increases here. So the 500 is a $50 increase, the 500 plus unit only and the kit are both increasing by $150. Compute modules a bit more reasonable, $11.25 up to $50, $100 for the Compute Module 5. Yeah, I mean, these are big price increases, aren't there? I mean, obviously, as Eben said, the price of the RAM that they use, this LPDDR4 RAM, has increased sevenfold over the past 12 months, which is just insane. So, looking at some British prices, I tried to go and look at, there is actually a link that says here that you can buy a Raspberry Pi here, so I clicked on it, took me to another page on their site, and something I saw that did amuse me was this picture here, this still from evidently the 500 video, with this lady here, and her eye makeup does make her look like she is crying, and I thought that might be a direct response to these price increases, but maybe not. I think this video was probably made long before that. Just amuse me a little bit. Anyway, of course, we need to go to a British reseller to get some British prices for these models. And you can probably tell that I've been out of the world of Raspberry Pi for a while now, other than some of these Pico-based projects, because these prices were a huge shock to me. This is Pi Moroni. This is absolutely no comment on their pricing. I've always used them. I've always found them to be very, very reasonable indeed. And also, they're very, the customer service is excellent as well. There are other resellers available in the UK, and they are also very good. This has just kind of always been my go-to. So I was going to use them as an example for the pricing. And as we can see, the new 3GB model is £80 and 40 pence. £80 for a Raspberry Pi. But the most expensive one up here is this 8GB model. This is the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B 8GB version. £158 and 40 pence. 160 quid for a Raspberry Pi. My goodness, I mean, the 1GB model, what can you even use the 1GB model for nowadays? I guess you could use it for, like, Pi-hole or something like that. £33.60. That's just for the bare board on its own. No external case or any of the other accessories and things that you need. Of course, the Model 4 is a very capable machine, we can't forget, but I cannot believe how much these things cost nowadays. And again, that is just purely to do with RAM pricing. It's to do with external forces that are being attributed to these AI companies. Not a comment at all on Raspberry Pi or indeed Pi Moroni here. It's just, there are, of course, alternatives available to these. There have been clones of the Raspberry Pi machines available. The Pico is becoming very popular, and that is still reasonably low cost, I do believe, although that's not what this story is about. Let's just click through to the Pico and have a look at the prices on some of these. So yeah, look at that. The Pico 2W with headers, £7.60, or if you want it without the headers, £6.60. So if you don't need the full-blown processing power and RAM of the full-fat Raspberry Pi models, the Pico is always a great option. Look at this, without the Wi-Fi, the basic Pico 2, £4.32. So there is still some hope, some light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, big price increases across the board on the Raspberry Pi. Some quite eye-watering increases we can see here. Of course, these shortages are affecting everybody. They're affecting one project in my day job as well, where we're actually buying some new servers for a new expansion for one of my customers. Those prices have also come through as quite eye-watering and have been increasing day by day, so we've had to kind of nail that down quite quickly. It's the way of the world at the moment, but there you go. Very expensive Raspberry Pis. Anyway, on to some perhaps more positive news and also some rather more retro/vintage gaming news as well. Moving on from all of that unpleasantness. And this is a story all about the PlayStation 1, a console which I have talked about a fair bit recently because it is a console I have started to get into, thanks to the Mister, specifically my Mister Multi-System. I've been downloading a load of PS1 games and enjoying those with a PS1 fan who is introducing me to all of those wonderful old games, which has been quite a lot of fun. But yeah, as mentioned, it is a console that I am currently getting to know because we were into PCs at the time and it isn't one that I was all that familiar with at the time, other than kind of playing it around some friends' houses. Die Hard Trilogy was a game I used to play quite a lot on a friend's PlayStation with the old light gun on the CRT TV. That was a great game. And of course, Tomb Raider, although that came out on the PC as well. But anyway, these original PlayStation consoles are still quite sought after. Certain models are quite sought after for specific reasons. There is one that is or has always been quite popular with audiophiles, which is, I think, kind of over-reported and overvalued. But yeah, people saying that this specific early model of PS1 was like the ultimate like CD player because of the digital to analog converter in it. And I think that's probably died off a little bit now, but yeah, still very much a thing that people talk about. But the various different revisions and models all had their own strengths and weaknesses. And of course, if you were in the market for a PlayStation 1 and you wanted the original hardware rather than going down, say, the emulation route or the MiSTer route, you had to choose which of those compromises you were happy with and which particular strengths you were, perhaps looking for in a console. But that is no longer the case because you can have the best of all worlds thanks to this new project. So this is being reported over on timeextension.com, and I love this. This is the absolute best of the console modding community, I think. This is really, really cool. So, story here by Damien McFerrin. Modder picks apart old PlayStation consoles to create the ultimate hybrid PS1. If you know your PS1 history, you'll be aware that not all of Sony's 32-bit consoles were created equal. Like any hardware maker, the Japanese tech giant made revisions to the core PlayStation build, swapping out parts and streamlining the internals to reduce costs and sometimes improve performance. With this in mind, it's hard to pinpoint which is the best PS1 model to go for, so thank goodness that modder Secret Hobbyist has taken the hard work out of the decision by creating an all-new printed circuit board that lets you craft the ultimate 32-bit PlayStation. There is a video here as well, if you want to go and watch that on YouTube. I'll tell you what, I'll open that up so I remember to link to that separately. But yeah, as spotted by Engadget, Secret Hobbyist Custom PCB is populated with parts from the PM41V2 motherboard from the PS1 and the PU18, which is apparently an original model. This means it has the coveted Asahi Kasei digital to analog audio converter, which was only featured on the older PS1 consoles, as well as a component which allows the board to communicate with the X-Station mod, an ODE that runs games from a micro SD card. So we've got the PS1 CPU and GPU, which are apparently more efficient than those found in older variants, and the whole package is rounded off with an FPGA chip, which enables HDMI output. Another big bonus is that this tiny board has low power demands, which means it could potentially be factored into a handheld build. So yeah, this is just the PCB at the moment, as you can see. Very nice compact little unit here. The top lid of this PS1 is obviously just kind of slightly over CD size, so that gives you an impression as to the size of this thing, probably about, 10 centimeters square, something like that. And yeah, so we've got the CPU and GPU from the PS1. We've got the older DAC chip from the one of the original PlayStation models, that sought after audiophile quality audio output, whatever that means. And of course, an FPGA chip, which helps to tie those two chips together and also gives us a nice native HDMI output. So really, really nice modernization of that console. Something that Sony could perhaps consider releasing as their own PlayStation Mini. I know they've done a PlayStation Mini and that was all kind of software emulation based, but, might be a cool thing for them to release. Probably not. But yeah, I love stuff like this from the hobbyist community. I've always been a big fan of the work of, people like Macho Nacho Productions who do these console mods and things. And of course, what's his name? Taki Udon, who did that was a PS1 related project as well, wasn't it? He's done a lot of other really cool kind of retro hardware things. And I hadn't come across Secret Hobbyist before. Apparently 17,000 subscribers. There you go. You now have another subscriber. And I am going to save this to my watch later list as well, because I do want to give this video a watch a bit later on. 10 minutes long, and it looks like it's going to be very interesting. But yeah, if you are looking to get into the world of the original PlayStation and you are not willing to compromise, you want the absolute best of all worlds and you want it on original hardware rather than software emulation or a MiSTer, this seems like the ultimate way to enjoy that console. And some more excellent news this week, again from Time Extension, for PlayStation fans, which, if I was a smarter man, would have tacked on to the end of the last story. But alas, I forgot. Anyway, I did want to bring this to your attention, and I don't have a huge amount to say about this, but I do think this is a very cool project as a fan of both retro gaming and Lego, of course, as I'm sure many of us are. So, Let's head back. This is Jack Yarwood this time. A flood of happy memories. This fan-made Lego PSP needs your help to become the real deal. And this is on the Lego Ideas website, where, of course, people submit their own designs for Lego sets, and the Lego community at large can go and vote for them and say, yes, if this was made into a real set, I would buy this. And if they get enough interest, Lego actually go and turn these into real sets. Although I think obviously they would have to work with Sony on this one because of the copyright implications and stuff. So you never know, it might not become a reality. But if this is something that you're interested in, at least go and give it your vote. You never know. So, ever wanted to own a Lego version of the PlayStation Portable? Well, now could be your chance to make your voice heard. That's because a PSP fan called Yakya has just submitted an amazing 333-piece concept to the Lego Ideas website, which replicates the handheld's iconic design, such as its shape, its D-pad, shoulder and action buttons, and its 16:9 screen, as well as other smaller details, such as the volume control on the side and its tiny yellow charging port. The design is pitched as being almost one-to-one to the original PSP 1000, the original PSP launch model, and, according to its creator, uses multiple slope pieces and snot bricks to capture the sleek, complex curves of the PSP. There's even a removable disc tray included too, featuring a recreation of a PSP demo disc for good measure. During a trip back to my childhood home, I found my old PSP sitting in a box during some spring cleaning, Yakyar wrote, explaining the inspiration behind the design. With it came a flood of happy memories. This drove me to start work on a recreation of the device as a decorative, interactive model to hopefully give fellow fans of this device a similar feeling as to what I felt. This build was made using Bricklink Studio, a digital Lego building platform without the use of illegal building techniques. There are no collisions between bricks, and the internal structure is fully complete. So yeah, that was first published on the Lego Ideas site yesterday, April the 1st, and currently has, at the time of writing, just 514 supporters. Shall we have a look at the website? Just see what the current status is. And it has 424 days to hit its next milestone, which is set at 1,000. Let's see what it's at the moment. Go away, cookie warning. 1,380 supporters, so 605 days left to get 5,000. Looks like it's well on its way, which is great to see. Got some more specs and some nicer quality photos on here as well. Look at this thing. That is very cool. That is very well made indeed. Anyway. And yeah, it just goes on to, it goes on to say, in order to be considered for an official Lego set, it will need a lot more support than that, with the ultimate target being 10,000 supporters. To this day, the PlayStation Portable, or PSP for short, still holds a lot of happy memories for those who were lucky enough to own one during its heyday, thanks to both its impressive library of games and its multimedia capabilities, such as the ability to play music and films and connect to the internet. That reminds me of a friend of mine. I shouldn't talk about this on a family-friendly podcast, but he found a rather interesting use for the video playback function on his PSP before the days of smartphones and he didn't own his own laptop or anything like that. So, hats off to him for his ingenuity. He shall remain unnamed. But not just the games console. That's a rather random memory. Anyway, and of course the story goes on to talk about the PSP, how it was first introduced in 2004, and unfortunately how it didn't sell as well as the Nintendo DS, which I think it is fair to point out was kind of a much cheaper option than the PSP, which was perhaps aimed at a bit more of a hardcore audience. Anyway, if you want your own Lego PSP 1000, you can go to the Lego Ideas website and chuck your vote into the hat, and perhaps when it reaches 10,000, it might become an official thing. But as mentioned, perhaps some copyright issues to be negotiated there as well. But the least I can do is let you know that it exists, because it looks very cool. And so we now find ourselves in a part of the Ramble that I particularly enjoy, because I get to talk to you about something that a lot of you aren't fully on board with and that always causes a bit of controversy, but I very much enjoy it. And it probably explains my declining viewership and listenership over recent months, because it's something I keep banging on and on about. And it's not Doom. It's not the Doom Shrine. You keep forgetting the Doom Shrine's on that side these days. No, not this week. In fact, I don't really have a story about Doom this week, come to think about it. please submit some more Doom stories. We're going to have to go without. No, this is about Linux. This is about gaming on Linux. I know. He's banging on about Linux again. But my most recent video, which I will talk about at the end of this ramble, but in my most recent video, I took a look at a mini PC that was sent to me for review, and I did some benchmarking and stuff on this. And, ran it through its paces. Some quite high-end games, although some of them a few years old, of course. It is a mini PC. It's essentially a laptop chipset. But found that those games ran an awful lot better under Linux than they did under Windows 11, even though they're all Windows games. And this is something that I keep coming up against time and time again, and something I keep banging on about and keep telling people, if you don't want to, if you don't play the games that have the, the kind of kernel-integrated online anti-cheat stuff that relies on Windows, you should be checking out Linux because stuff runs great on there, particularly if you have an AMD GPU. Anyway, the story here, now I've done my preacher bit, and I can see the retention graph going that way. But anyway, I am passionate about this. It has been a record month for Linux gaming as far as the Steam hardware survey is concerned. And this is historic. This is actual, an all-time record for the number of users playing games under Linux on Steam. It's 5%. I know, it's not that much, is it, in the grand scheme of things? And unsurprisingly, it's more than macOS. This is the actual figures from March from the Steam hardware survey, which if you have been a Steam user on PC for any length of time, you will have seen one of these pop up. Please can we harvest all of your hardware details for the Steam hardware survey? I always say yes, because, I think it allows developers to target games more accurately to their users, and ultimately as a Bazite user, I like to be represented as well. This is a story over on Foronics, just kind of summing this up better than I could, rather than digging through the data myself. Michael Larrabell, thank you very much, Michael, for writing this up. 69 comments. Steam on Linux use skyrocketed in March, more than double the macOS gaming market share. If Valve's latest Steam survey monthly figures are accurate, Steam on Linux enjoyed a very wild month of March. Steam on Linux is now above the 5% threshold and more than twice the size of the Steam on macOS market share. And I will say, I do have Steam on my M1 MacBook Air here, and other than when I very first got it, I think I played Undertale on it. Yeah, I don't know. I've not done any gaming on this thing at all. It's... Mac gaming is, you'd think it would be bigger, wouldn't you? You would, wouldn't you? Especially with the iPhone being kind of such a big kind of gaming platform as well. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about here. Steam on Linux ended 2025 at around 3.5% market share, dipped a bit in January and fell to 2.23% in February. That's still much better than several years ago in the pre-Steam Deck days when Steam on Linux was at around 1%. I don't think they even made a native Linux client before the Steam Deck, did they? At least not that long before, anyway. In absolute terms, with the continued growth of the Steam user base, 2 to 3% was rather healthy, considering all of its bumps over the past decade. But Valve just published the Steam survey results for March 2026, and they have never been so incredible for Linux. 5.33%. Steam on Linux was never above 5%, and this is easily an all-time high for the Linux gaming market share, especially in absolute numbers. A massive 3.1% spike in March. macOS also jumped by 1.19% to 2.35%, and Windows is losing 4.28% down to 92.33%. And I think it's fair to say that's because Windows 11 has been a bit of a mess just lately, although Microsoft are starting to make some noises about finally fixing that. But we'll see. We're scaling down on the integrated Copilot AI stuff and actually releasing some stuff as native Windows applications rather than web-based stuff, which is completely pointless in Microsoft's case because, a lot of their stuff isn't cross-platform anyway, but whatever. Part of the jump at least appears to be explained by Valve correcting against the Steam China numbers. Month over month, they report a 31.85% drop to the simplified Chinese language, and English use increasing by 16.82% to 39.09%. Other languages also showed gains amid the massive decline in simplified Chinese use. So the actually perhaps the Windows market share was being overinflated because, of course, pirated Windows in in the Middle East and Far East and stuff like that. Not wanting to stereotype people and stuff like that, but I think that is quite a well-known phenomenon in the world of the PC and the world of computing. It has been for quite a long time. Anyway, the important thing here is that, Linux, Steam, AMD CPU use by Steam on Linux gamers is by far the most popular. So, 70% of Linux gamers are using AMD CPUs, and I would guess the AMD GPU figures would be quite high as well, although they are not reported on here. But, the headline figure here, Linux gamers on Steam have now reached the 5% market share milestone, and I think that's actually quite an important milestone. And I think the rapid decline of Windows is also perhaps quite telling of what's going on in the wider PC market as well. I thought it was interesting. Also, as you know, something I am a massive fanboy of as well. So good news in this department always cheers me up. And that, of course, my dearest ramblers, brings us around rather neatly to my regular Videos of the Week feature, wherein I feature videos that I have watched here on the old YouTubes in the past week that have entertained, educated, enlightened, or otherwise improved my life in some small way. Quite often they are retro and vintage computing, gaming and technology related, and quite often they aren't. Quite often there is one video, and quite often there is more than one. And I'm very pleased to report that this week I have 3 videos for you. And at least one of them is retro computing / gaming related, hardware related, in a kind of tenuous way. We'll go with that. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into this. Now, the first video is one that I mentioned earlier on in this ramble. This is Scott Manley. He has 1.84 million subscribers. Apparently, I'm not one of them. There we go. Now I am. And this is his 40-minute and 50-second long video, all about using the ZX Spectrum, the original, an original 48K ZX Spectrum, to control Kerbal Space Program and actually land him on the moon, using more processing power than the original Apollo guidance computer, but certainly a hell of a lot less than you would have in modern PCs, modern computers, of course. This old Z80 CPU-based machine from the 1980s that I'm sure a lot of us in the UK very fondly remember. A really great video, really well put together, and explains kind of the technical details of this as well. And as I explained earlier, he uses a serial interface to actually use the Spectrum to control Kerbal Space Program here. Of course, he isn't actually launching an actual rocket to the moon. That part is simulated on modern hardware, but I think we can forgive him for that. It would be very, very impressive if he did, though. And this is a follow-up to a previous video that he did with a very similar setup where he actually flew a rocket to the moon, but didn't successfully land on the moon. So you can go and check that one out as well. I'll see if I can find it for you, but more than likely I probably won't be able to find it. But anyway, that is that. Can My First Computer Control a Spaceship by Scott Manley. Really good 15-minute watch if you want to see some space-based shenanigans, if perhaps the latest NASA Artemis mission to the moon has got you a bit hyped up for space again, as it has done for me. So that is that. Now, the next topic is, if you've been with the channel for a while, you will know that I have a bit of a connection to this topic. This is to do with solar power. And this has really kind of taken the interest of the people on my Discord server this week. And I must admit, it has me as well, because a few years ago, I built a custom solar power setup just because I wanted to learn about how it all worked, really. And I used it to power my studio, my entire studio. And I had that up and running for a couple of years at home. It has now all been packed up and is all sat in the garage awaiting a reincarnation. But there's been a lot of talk about these DIY solar setups in the UK over this past few weeks, because the government are actually debating making these grid-tied systems legal. I appreciate this is a bit of a tangent for those of you who are here for the retro computing and gaming stuff, but it is technology, and it is quite an interesting technology. But yeah, and if you remember, I made a video about this, and it got like nearly 1 million views, and I got a load of abuse for it, and I eventually ended up taking that video down, which had a massive negative impact on my channel. That was about 5 years ago. I think I'm still feeling the after effects of that now, but whatever. I didn't want to become a solar channel just to chase money and sponsorships and stuff. But yeah, these systems, these are quite popular across Europe, and essentially it just has a standard plug on it. And you just plug it in your house, and it just backfeeds the power from the solar panels via a microinverter, which is grid-tied, and basically supplements the power in your house and reduces your energy bills when the sun's shining, which seems very, very simple and very straightforward. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that, technically, and they are currently illegal in the UK, but won't be in a couple of months' time because, as I say, this is being debated. But this is a British solar YouTuber. I will say it's a kind of a electrician's YouTube channel, but does cover a lot of solar stuff, called eFix, and he actually buys one of these systems and plugs it in against the law and shows how it all works and how kind of seamless and how easy it all is. And, you know, with the prices of the panels and the other hardware coming down all the time and the prices of energy and stuff going up, I think it's something that's going to be a lot of interest to a lot of people. And other than the grid-tied microinverter, I already own all of this stuff as well. So perhaps something that I could be revisiting at some point in the future. But in the meantime, I will live vicariously through eFix. And that is what I've chosen to do. And indeed, a very interesting video on that specific topic. So that's 8 minutes and 25 long. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about that subject, I can highly recommend it. Or if you're just into electronics and electrical stuff and just want to watch an interesting video, fits the bill as well. Now, my third video of the week is something completely different again, and this is something that British people of a certain age will appreciate, and I'm not sure if this will be available outside of the UK for copyright reasons, but I do want to recommend this because I stumbled across this over the past few days, and I've actually been watching these, and I've enjoyed it a lot, and I think if there is at least 1 or 2 people in my audience who will appreciate appreciate revisiting this, then it will have been worth my while. So back in the 90s, there was a chap called Chris Evans, not the Hollywood actor Chris Evans, but a ginger TV and radio personality who was very popular in the UK. He had the most popular, I think he still has the most popular radio breakfast show in the UK, and is still all around, very much admired and loved as a lovable, cheeky, chappy, TV and radio presenter. I think he turned 60 the other day, actually. I think I remember hearing. But anyway, he used to have a show called TFI Friday, which went out on a Friday evening. Now, there were 2 versions at one point. I remember there was a pre-Watershed one, and then there was like a live one that was later, that was at like 9 o'clock in the evening, that had swearing and all sorts of stuff in it. Very controversial. But it was basically, notionally, a music show, and they had some really, really awesome musical guests on. I mean, this is Ocean Colour Scene playing here. This was when the Riverboat song was brand new, and that song was literally only just released in 1996. And as you can see, the quality of these, I mean, these are official Channel 4 uploads, evidently from their own master tapes, and they are very, very good quality. The video quality is great. The audio quality is great. Of course, they were recorded in standard definition, being 1996, but you can't ask for much better than this. They are complete, so they're all like 50-odd minutes long each. I think they've uploaded the first 3 episodes so far, but it was so cool to just go back and see how the whole thing started, and of course it is now back in some form or another, but I just remember this being such a big part of like 90s Friday night entertainment in the UK. I mean, I would have been 12 in 1996, so I was not old enough to actually go out on a Friday, but I was kind of starting to get into music and starting to play the guitar and stuff, and of course, a bit of swearing and stuff on a Friday night was very much something that appealed to teenage me, especially as the years went on. I don't know when TFI Friday actually ended. I think it was very early 2000s, was it? And there have been a couple of kind of reboots and stuff, and there is, as I say, like a current reboot as well. But anyway, if you remember that and you enjoyed it, some really excellent musical guests, some really good interviews and stuff, and just a chaotic 90s Friday night British TV, hosted by the lovely Chris Evans. So there's 3 of those on the TFI Friday official channel, 50-odd minutes long, and my other 2 videos of the week. We've got this DIY solar video at 8 minutes and 25 seconds, and this Scott Manley video landing a spacecraft on the moon using the power of the 48K ZX Spectrum from 1980s 8-bit computing Britain. I mangled that sentence a bit, didn't I? Anyway, so that is that. Now, a couple of my own bits of news to talk about as well. I had a video go out this morning. It's a sponsored video. It's one I've mentioned a couple of times over the past couple of weeks. It's this Geekom A5 Pro mini PC. As mentioned, in this video, I show it running Windows and also Bazzite, and also there is a massive performance increase under Bazzite compared to Windows, which really surprised me. I expected it to be slightly better, but not... over 40% better as far as the GPU benchmarks were concerned. So I think it's quite interesting from that point of view. Had to pick a clickbaity title and stuff for it, so I've gone with, pitting it against the Steam machine. I know, it's a sponsored video. To be honest, I just wanted one of these to play with, and they kept emailing me, and they were emailing me for over a year trying to send one of these. So had to fulfill my side of the bargain and at least make a video about it. But I did, I did try to make it very, entertaining and interesting and useful to people in that way that I do. And actually, the results did surprise me. And yeah, I'm quite a big fan of this little thing now at the moment. And not just because they let me keep it. But that is that. It is getting on for half an hour long. In fact, it is half an hour long. It took me so much. I mean, I think the first early draft of this was about 50 minutes. And it took so much work to get it edited down just because there was so much stuff I wanted to cover. So many different benchmarks and things. But as you can probably see, I've been watching a lot of random gaming in HD just lately, and I think that's rubbed off on me, and that's kind of reflected in the style of this video. So if you like his videos, I think you'll probably enjoy this one as well. And I can personally recommend this PC. I don't think it is actually very good, but they're not paying me to say that in my podcast as well, so we will swiftly move on. And I just wanted to move on, just before we wrap up for this week, to my eBay purchase of the week as well. So, this was pointed out on a different, on another Discord server, on the Retro Collective, of course, previously known as RMC, my good friend Neil. And someone posted a link to this over there, and I just couldn't help but buy one myself. So this is an original Atari. This is Warner-era Atari, as we can see, Warner Communications Company. This is... apparently dates back to 1980 and is apparently new old stock. I mean, it's certainly not been used, I can tell you that much, but it is in very, very good condition considering how old it is. I mean, this is what, getting on for... I was going to say getting on for 50 years old. That's depressing, isn't it? That means I'm getting on for 50 years old. But anyway, it's got the name and address label that you might remember from your old school bags back in the day on the end that you can take out and fill in with your details. That's still there and still original. Got the I Love Atari and the Atari logos and things. It is made of this... Oh, goodness. It's cheap and nasty. It is proper cheap and nasty. It's made of this horrible plasticky material. That's probably why it survived so well. It's got these rather basic metal pressed feet in the bottom, and it's got kind of a leather effect, hard plastic base to it as well. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a wonderful piece of Atari history. I have no reason to doubt that it is genuine. It cost me 40 quid, which I actually think is quite reasonable. Is it? Probably a bit silly. I could actually use it to keep stuff in. I probably will use it to keep maybe cables and accessories for some of my consoles and things in. But if nothing else, it looks quite nice hanging around the studio. And I'll try to find the link and post it down below. I don't know if the seller has any left, but that was an excellent spot there. I can't remember the name of the person that spotted it. I'm really sorry. I should have made a note of that. And also, as for forgetting the names of people, and I think it's about time we wrapped up for this week, of course, I'd like to say a big thank you to Technic, Naoki, Tim's Retro Corner, DBK, Life Size Teddy Bear, Vanessa, and indeed Monemo for all of your contributions and discussions over on Discord this week. If you are fed up of me talking about Discord and want to come and join us, there is a link down in the description. And finally, Reese Rambles, as we know, goes out at 2 minutes to midnight every single Friday night, UK time. It goes out on my second YouTube channel, youtube.com/Reese Rambles, and also on all of the podcast platforms, primarily Spotify, but it does filter out from there to basically all of the other ones, as far as I know. Of course, if you're here and you've made it to the end of this one, you probably know what this is all about anyway. But yeah, thank you ever so much for joining me. As mentioned earlier, I will not be here next week because I will be skiing in the French Alps, but I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. Of course, there won't be any main channel releases either. Now that review's out of the way, which took me far too long to put together, I would like to get back onto stuff properly, but so much stuff going on at the moment, so much stuff. But anyway, I'm still here, still committed. And yeah, thanks once again. That's all I have for you for this week's Ramble. I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. Bye.